co-founder and vice president of policy and campaigns, Richard Island. Richard?
Yes, good. Thanks, Ryan. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday. And today we wanted to dig in deeper into what's happening at the federal level on carbon tax ideas. And as you all probably are aware, there have been some interesting proposals, particularly coming from conservatives, which we'll learn more about here in a moment. So just as quick background for those of you who don't know, the American Sustainable Business Council is a national business policy group. We advocate on a wide range of issues across many different sectors and represent several 100,000 companies across the United States and work at the federal as well as state level. And if you're interested in learning more about our advocacy work and feel that your company would benefit from engaging in the policy debates at the federal and state level, we'd be happy to talk to you. So why don't we go to our next slide, Ryan, and I want to introduce quickly our speakers. That's me, and you can go to the next one. I see that we are trying to get former Congressman Bob Inglis on the line, but Bob will join us momentarily. So Congressman Inglis was elected to Congress in 1992 from South Carolina. He served in Congress for about 10 years, and then he lost his re-election bid in 2010 because he was primaried out, largely because of insistence that climate change was caused by human activity. And since then, Bob has been involved with George Mason University, the Energy and Environment Institute there, championing the cause of climate change and encouraging fellow Republicans to become more active on that issue. Why don't we go to the next slide? We also have with us today Walt Minnick. Walt is also a former congressman from Idaho, and Walt is the co-founder of the Partnership for Responsible Growth, which is a bipartisan organization that's advocating for policies to address climate change. And Walt, as he'll describe in a few moments, has particularly been focusing on the connection between federal tax reform and the possibility of a carbon tax. Finally, we'll be joined by Josh Karetny. Josh is with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse's office. Mr. Whitehouse is a senator from Rhode Island. Josh has been with the senator for 10 years, and he's the legislative director and has been working actively on the senator's American Carbon Fee Act, which is really a seminal piece of legislation that we'll learn more about in a moment. So, Ryan, is Congressman Inglis with us yet?
We are still trying to get him on the line right now.
Okay, and any of our other speakers online so that we can start with them and then circle back to Bob? Okay, it looks like we are waiting for our speakers to get on the line. They seem to be having a little trouble. Apologies, folks, for the delay here. Again, Ryan, is Josh or Walt on the phone at this point?
Not so far.
Richard?
Yes, hello?
This is Josh.
Okay, great, Josh. Good, thank you. Good, so Josh, we're going to mix up the order a little bit here, and since you're on first, you get to be the first speaker, if you wouldn't mind. And again, folks, let me just frame a little bit more there before Josh starts. There are two really broad principles here about a price on carbon. One is the revenue positive approach, in which money is raised or reinvested in various projects, clean energy initiatives. That's called the revenue positive approach, which Senator Whitehouse has largely been a champion of. Then there's more the revenue neutral approach, in which revenues raised or refunded to taxpayers through a dividend. And I'm simplifying it, but just wanted to give that quick background. And Josh, let me turn it over to you to give us an update on your important work in the Senate and what your prognosis is for progress in this Congress.
All right. Well, as you mentioned, Senator Whitehouse, last Congress introduced the American Opportunity Carbon Fee Act, along with Senator Shultz of Hawaii. The legislation really had two purposes. One, to put a thoughtful carbon tax proposal out for discussion and to generate interest and ideas. And the second purpose was really to serve as an olive branch to Republicans in Congress to show that Senators Whitehouse and Shultz are serious about negotiating on revenue uses for a carbon fee. The American Opportunity Carbon Fee Act includes an upstream carbon fee, which would have begun at the Obama administration's 3% discount range social cost of carbon, around $45 per ton of emissions, would have grown at a real 2% rate annually, and would have generated something of the order of $2 trillion over 10 years in revenue. For congressional budget purposes, we look at a 10-year horizon for revenue and deficit impacts. And that $2 trillion is, even in this town, an awful lot of money. One could use that money to invest in any number of programs and to bring other members of Congress to the table. I think we dedicated about a third of that $2 trillion in revenue to reducing the top marginal corporate tax rate from 35% to 29%. I think it's pretty safe to say that Senator Whitehouse would not necessarily support a corporate tax rate cut like that as a standalone policy. That is a Republican-leaning policy to cut corporate taxes. But we put that in the bill to show that we were serious about working with Republicans on a carbon tax. We got quite a bit of attention outside of Congress. We did generate a number of discussions, and people, Republican-leaning economists and former members of Congress and cabinet officials did say nice things about our bill, but we were unable to get a single member of Congress to introduce, a single Republican member of Congress to co-sponsor or to introduce a House version of the bill. We're going to try again. We will be reintroducing the bill later in the spring, likely in substantially the same form as we had introduced it last time around. In terms of prospects, the election was a surprise. We thought that we were going to have the momentum going into this Congress and a favorable administration to finally act on pricing carbon. I think that the election the outcome did bring some opportunities with it. One of the opportunities might be tax reform. Right now, there's a lot of interest in tax reform, but as we saw last Congress and the Congress before, and for years before that, tax reform is really, really tough. People talk about base broadening, rate lowering tax reform, but base broadening is a euphemism for cutting loopholes, and each loophole has a champion, and some of those champions have a lot of money to put into lobbying. So I think many of the members of Congress who have worked on tax reform have come to the conclusion that it's really impossible to lower rates without a new source of revenue. And we think that a carbon tax is a very attractive new source of revenue in that it can generate a ton of money, and at the same time deal with a problem that is overdue for some federal resolution. There are Republicans out there, people like Art Laffer, who would say, he's agnostic on climate change, but dealing with climate change, even if he's neutral on it, if it can be done in a capacity that also lowers, in a vehicle that also lowers the corporate tax rate, he would enthusiastically support it. So we're hoping that there are enough Art Laffer-like Republicans in Congress who would be open to this new source of revenue, even if they're somewhat skeptical on the climate change goals. There are very few other potential sources of revenue that would generate anything near this amount of money. A value-added tax would, but there's very little appetite for that among the Republicans. Things like a financial transactions tax have come up, and that's vehemently opposed by the banking industry. So we think that actually a carbon tax might be the most palatable form of new revenue to help facilitate tax reform.
Good. Josh, let me just ask you one quick question, and then we'll go to either Walt, who I know is on the line, or to Bob Inglis. As you think of the revenue positive reinvestment approach that the senator and you have taken, is that a major impediment to its progress because there's a stronger constituency for refunding all the dollars to taxpayers?
Well, I just want to be clear that Senator Whitehouse views his approach as a revenue neutral approach. We do, and what he means by that is we do take all of the revenue generated and return it to taxpayers in different forms. The corporate tax is one way of returning it to some taxpayers, but the rest of the revenue in our bill goes out in the form of basically rebates to households. And depending on the household, it can take a different form. For working Americans, it would come in the form of a refundable tax credit to rebate payroll taxes paid, which would be worth $500 a person, $1,000 per married couple, and then that would go up with inflation. So he views his approach as revenue neutral. I think the definition of revenue neutrality we have found varies greatly. There are some Republicans that who don't view tax credits as tax cuts, and under that methodology, only lowering tax rates would be considered revenue neutral.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you for that distinction. So, Josh, if you could stay with us for a while, if you have the time, and Walt, are you there?
I am. Yes.
Okay. Great. And let me just ask, Ryan on our team, has Bob Inglis been able to get on yet?
If you can hear me, I'm here now.
Yeah. Okay. Great, Bob. Walt, if you don't mind just waiting, let's get Bob's perspective here. And Bob, if you heard, some of what Josh was describing as Senator Whitehouse's effort, and I know you know the senator, if you could give us sort of your perspective, what works, where we are politically, and then we'll go to Walt, who has been, I know, spending lots of time on Capitol Hill, particularly talking to Republicans about the possible opportunity. So, Bob, we'll turn it to you now.
Yeah, so that was a great presentation by Josh. And I'd say thank you to Josh for working all that work on the bill. Senator Whitehouse is offering, as I've said, an olive limb, not just a branch to corporate tax reduction in return for a carbon tax. So it's really great work that Sheldon Whitehouse is doing in that regard, and it's because as I heard at American Sustainability Conference gathering from him, that it's because he knows we need to move quickly. We don't need to mess around with a normal negotiation process. Go right ahead and offer conservatives what they would find attractive. And then, congratulations to Senator Whitehouse and to Josh for all that work. It also offered this hope, and follow up to what Josh was saying, is I think things are changing. Yes, they've been unable as yet to find a conservative co-sponsor of that legislation, but there's a train wreck coming between conservatism and populism. Those two forces are in the process of a collision right now. And when they collide, I'm happy to be in the conservative car because it's got a frame to it that's been developed over decades of very thoughtful people. Populism is made out of plastic. And when this collision happens, the populist car is going to go to pieces. And we're going to find out that the populist pitchforks and torches are not good building tools, that they are good for burning things down and tearing things up. But at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to build something. And so I think that, and obviously I'm speaking more broadly here than just the action on climate change, which is our singular focus at republicen.org. But I think that it's important to understand the meta environment that we'll be dealing with here, that it's mostly going to be about that collision. And when the collision occurs, there are going to be opportunities for climate action because climate action is one of the classic situations where we need a solution. Conservatism has a solution. Populism has only anger and scapegoats. Conservatism says, here's what we do. We follow a principle that we deeply believe in, of accountability. And we simply bring accountability to all the fuels. We eliminate all the subsidies. And we make the fuels fully accountable for all their cost. And then there's a level playing field for a competition between the incumbent fuels and the challenger fuels. And when that happens, we're pretty confident that the challenger fuels are going to do fine. Without a production tax credit for wind, without an investment tax credit for solar, without electric car credits, without anything like direct subsidies like we did with Solyndra. So in that competition, that fair competition, we think that the challenger fuels will do real well. And now that's bad news if you're in one of the incumbent fuels that so far has evaded accountability. But we conservatives really believe in the creative destructionism of the capitalistic system. And if a challenger fuel can beat an incumbent fuel, well, stinks for the incumbent fuel. But society is better off. And the future comes. And this is really exciting. So, and I hope you can tell here that the language that we're using at republicen.org in order to reach conservatives, particularly the people in the conservative car facing this collision with populism, is hold on, we realize that populism's been riding high, and it is a fast oncoming car. But when these things collide, stick to your principles and stop shrinking in science denial, engage in the competition of ideas, raise your hand in class, you're the kid with the answer. All it is internalizing negative externalities. And the most efficient way to do that is through an upstream application of a border adjustable, revenue neutral carbon tax. Yes, it's hard to sell a carbon tax. The T word is really difficult, but we can show you some great footage of Milton Friedman, one of the fathers of modern conservatism, on the Phil Donahue show, saying, how do you deal with pollution? Well, you tax it, of course. And then he gives a great explanation of internalizing negative externalities. So it's what conservatives deeply believe. We just need to remind them of it, get it on talk radio so the tune can get recognized. Once it's recognized, we believe that conservatives can start humming it. When they do, elected officials will start humming it too. But we have to start that in the heartland, because politicians typically follow, they don't lead. So once we establish that there's a parade on a main street ready to do something about climate change, we're certain that elected officials will run around out front to lead the parade where it's going. So we just got to get the parade going out on Main Street.
Okay, Bob, I know that that is an important framing, and I think it's a great segue here to Walt Minnick, who also used to be in Congress and has been working on these issues. And Bob, I want to come back to this messaging framing opportunity and really see how all these interest groups can come together about how to make the business case, in particular, for a price on carbon. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But Walt, are you still with us there?
I am, yes.
Okay, great. So Walt, I know you've been spending a lot of time with your colleagues from the Partnership for Responsible Growth on Capitol Hill, particularly looking at this debate over tax reform. And, as Bob and Josh both suggested, there may be some marriage here between congressional interest in tax reform, cutting certain taxes, and then looking for a replacement possibly vis-a-vis generating revenue from a carbon tax. So give us an update on that. And if you would also, Walt, tell us a little bit about the meeting in the White House a number of weeks ago with Ted Halstead and former Secretary of State Baker and Shultz. And
well, I wanted to start by saying that I'm extremely appreciative for what Josh and his boss, Senator Whitehouse, are doing. They are carrying the banner on Capitol Hill in a way that is hugely important, and have come up with a proposal that when we get around to doing something and stopping talking, I think will be very much like what Congress will eventually adopt. So, Josh, thank you for what you're doing. And I'm equally proud of my colleague, Bob Inglis, with whom I had the privilege to serve. He's been another real hero of this movement, and I think being a voice on the conservative side is going to be the critical catalyst to getting the kind of action that we all desire. And I think the question is it going to come soon, or is it going to is off in the future sometime? And I think there is some possibility it could come soon, and it needs to, I might add. I think probably most people on this call caught the news from the observatory in Hawaii, Mauna Loa, that the concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have now reached 406 parts per million. That's up from 300 million in pre-industrial age, and we're increasing at somewhere between 100 and 200 times the natural rate of increase, which is truly sobering and provides an easy explanation for why we see the Arctic melting, the lowest level of sea level ice that has been measured, and the Antarctic as well. So our view is there's no time to lose, and whatever we can do collectively to get action now is critically important. We can't afford to wait 4 or 6 years, and that's what makes this dialogue and what Bob and Senator Whitehouse doing so critically important. The proposals that are out there to Citizens Climate Lobby is advocating for a fee and dividend approach, starting relatively modest fee and then increasing rapidly, and dividending all of the money back, making it revenue neutral. The recent meeting at the White House between James Baker, Ted Halstead, people from the Climate Leadership Council are trying to introduce one of these concepts into the current discussion. And that's highly useful in socializing the idea among within the new administration and on Capitol Hill. Meantime, what we have been doing is trying to take advantage of the current situation, trying to make lemonade out of a bucket of limes by looking at what the priorities of that administration are and seeing if there's a way that we can introduce the carbon fee into that discussion. What you reference, the current discussion on taxes, I think the first of those opportunities. And tax reform, well, as Josh said, is very difficult, is nevertheless going to be on the table in this Congress. It's not going to be front and center on the table until they dispose of health care one way or the other. They've got to figure out a way to avoid shutting down the government before the end of next month. And they've also got to come up with a new baseline budget and pass that budget as a basis for adopting tax reform. But presumably that's going to happen. And I think that's going to set the table for tax reform, a serious tax reform discussion, maybe this summer sometime, certainly by fall. And we're trying to be ready for that by talking about that very large pay-for that Josh outlined, $1 trillion pay-for with a low carbon tax, $2 trillion pay-for, the way Congress scores things, with a higher carbon tax as a way to pay for the tax reform that has broad bipartisan support. The tax reform that is being talked about, the reform part, is 30 years overdue. It stops base erosion. It eliminates inversions or tax incentives for inversions. Any tax incentive to send jobs or factories overseas, and it makes American companies more competitive with their global competition. The problem is that cuts away a lot of revenue, and the national debt is already at alarming levels. The baseline before any tax reform or any new expenditures on infrastructure shows it moving from about national debt of about 14 trillion held by the public to over 24 trillion in 10 years. And that alone will push it higher than it's ever been in American history, even at the height of World War II, compared to the size of our economy. So if we're going to do tax reform, infrastructure, even build Trump's wall, it darn well better be paid for. And that's a message that does resonate in Republican offices. We visited about 90 of them, virtually all the Ways and Means Committee, Republican and Democrat, all the Senate Finance Committees. They're the groups that take the lead on tax reform. And probably half of those offices recognize that the pay-fors in the existing baseline proposal, an extremely controversial provision called the Border Adjustment Tax, which economists sometimes get comfortable with, but the idea of putting a 20% tax on anything you import into the country doesn't sit well with the Walmarts of the world, or taking away the business interest deduction doesn't sit well with farmers or small businessmen whose only source of capital is their local bank line. So we are confident, and members of these committees are confident, increasingly convinced, that those pay-fors are not going to fly. So if you're going to pay for tax reform, we need another big pay-for, and that's where the carbon tax comes in. And about half of these Republican offices appear to be open to the discussion. Half of them ideologically can't consider it. for various political reasons, but the other half are interested in giving our making our business competitive and giving our children a future, and are open to the discussion. That doesn't mean they're currently supportive of it, but they want to do tax reform. They need to pay for, and they need a new one. And if it's going to come up, as I think it most likely, sometime late summer or fall, they need to hear from constituents that a fee on carbon not only is a pay for something they want, tax reform, but is also something that our grandchildren very much need, that is bipartisan, that would bring warring factions in the Congress back to working for the common good. After all, that's what Bob and I were elected to do, and current members of Congress feel that obligation. And so I think it's got a real shot. But the key is going to be to get, and Josh can I think attest to this, is to get local constituents, people of influence from states and represented by senators and congressional districts represented by congressmen, that have employ people, produce things, or chairs of the local chamber of Congress to provide the political cover for this idea that we all support. And so my message, I guess, is there is an opportunity. We don't have to wait 4 or 8 years. And the key to it is let's all stop talking to each other about a good idea and devote our energy toward reaching our senators or congressmen to tell them that when the opportunity comes up in the context of some other administration priority to support a fee on carbon as the pay for.
Right. Good. Well, thank you for that. And just a quick connection here to make is the American Sustainable Business Council is working with Citizens Climate Lobby during the forthcoming congressional recess, April 11th to 21st, to participate in what we hope will be dozens of meetings with one's representatives across the country. So if you're interested in that, please let us know, and we will make sure you have an opportunity to go meet with your member of Congress and make some of the points that Walt just identified. Ryan, let's open it up for questions for our speakers and see who would like to add to the conversation.
All right, so we'll open up for questions. Feel free to submit using the questions feature or raise your hand, and we will activate your audio to ask one of our panelists.
In the meantime, Bob Inglis here. Could I just add a hearty amen to what Walt Minnick was just saying? The work that Walt and George Frampton and others are doing in reaching those members of Congress and gathering this information, plus presenting to them the opportunities in those pay-fors that Walt was just talking about is really important, because there will come a time when this is topical. It may not be topical at the moment, but it is going to become topical. And so chance favors a prepared mind. I think that was Einstein said that. And so a very important work there. And also to just underscore what Walt said, that it's really important too that where you're just mentioning there about connecting in the heartland with representatives, because at the end of the day, representatives generally try to represent their districts, and if they feel support, they feel interest from the people that they represent, then they feel comfortable leading. If they don't, then you have to count on some real clear moral compass that they have, or some real conviction that they have, so either one will do, but it sure does build the probabilities of action if you can add the sense that my constituents support it, because that'll help move things along and nurture any kind of conviction that members of Congress may be developing about those very alarming numbers that Walt was just referencing about CO2 levels.
Right. Good. Thank you, Bob. And Ryan, back to you. Any questions there from anybody?
Yes. First up, we have Richard Howe. Richard, are you on?
Yeah, I'm on.
Richard Howe has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the question I have, I kind of understand the concept of the revenue neutral and returning the revenues back to the citizens. I'm a little concerned from a long-term perspective that if you're trying to use carbon fees or carbon taxes to be a long-term revenue stream, that eventually, hopefully, it goes away, right? I mean, the goal is to reduce carbon, and so at some point that tax revenue would go away. So I'm more inclined to think that it works best if you use it as a tool to drive innovation and shrink the amount of carbon. But if we factor it into our long-term tax scheme, it's going to have a long-term problem.
Yeah, Josh, do you want to respond to that? Because I know you folks have thought a lot about where you set the price and then how that price would likely increase to the point at which it has some fundamental impact in the economy, and then then to Richard's point, it might begin to really scale down.
Sure, I think it's a fair point. Although I think when we talk about severe reductions in carbon and eventually moving to hopefully a zero carbon economy, we're talking about at least several decades out. But I think it's a fair point that if we're pairing revenue from a carbon fee with other uses like cutting taxes, we need to think beyond the impacts of just the first decade or the second decade. I think Senator Whitehouse wants to get a carbon price done for the sake of addressing climate change, and sees the revenue negotiation as a political necessity. So I don't think that the budget concerns in the third, fourth, fifth decade will really drive his negotiations. I think I would just leave it at future Congresses. I think he'd be very happy if 50 years from now climate change was no longer a problem and we had to deal with some budget gaps. That would be a very good outcome.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and Bob or Walt, do you want to comment on that point?
This is Walt. There's lots of sophisticated modeling been done on this by bright people in think tanks, Washington and elsewhere. And if you're talking about a rising carbon tax, and I think from a climate standpoint, that's what we need. The revenue in virtually all of these models with reasonable carbon tax and sensible escalations designed to continue to drive carbon down all show that for the first 10 to 20 years, the revenue as the emissions go down, the cost per unit of emission goes up, and revenue stays relatively constant for 20 years. And as Josh just said, if you can have a 20-year revenue stream that solves the climate problem, we've given a great gift to the children, to our children and grandchildren, even if 20 years from now they've got to figure out how else to pay for what they want to spend.
Okay, good. Ryan, another question.
Next up, we have Jennifer Grossman. Jennifer, you're on. All right, we might be having audio difficulty, but I'll go ahead and read the question. The question is, can you speak to the possibility and effectiveness of state action, Washington, Oregon, California, and possibly collaboration with provinces in Canada?
Anyone have a perspective on that?
This is Walt again.
Yeah.
That's where the action is at the moment. If we can't get a federal level action in the context of tax reform, or maybe the next one down the line will be paying for $1 trillion worth of the infrastructure improvements, which is also bipartisan. But so I think there will be some continuing federal opportunities. But for the next 2 years, the possibility of referenda in Massachusetts, Washington, California's got to do something, is where we can demonstrate the concept and socialize it in a way that will hopefully be noticed by Congress and catalyze federal action. So it's all good, and I would encourage people to get involved in those activities. Canada has, as a matter of federal policy, established a goal by 2022, not a goal, and their government's function. When the Prime Minister says something, until he loses an election, that's policy, and he's got a provincial buy-in to a $50 Canadian, roughly $40 US fee on carbon that's nationwide, and Canada's our largest trading partner. So we, and in order for them to protect their local industry, they're going to have to start putting border tax adjustments on imports from the U.S. and creating border tax subsidies for their exporters, all of which is permitted under WTO rules to keep their industry competitive. So we're going to be in the ironic position, if we don't follow them, that our largest trading partner is going to be collecting revenue from our exporters in order to support their domestic economy, while we're sitting head in sand and doing nothing to combat our own problem and paying other countries to pick up the slack. And that's not a position that the world's leading economy ought to be taking.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Walt just noted. In a number of northeastern states, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York, there are efforts underway to institute a price on carbon in this legislative session. So we have examples from the Northwest, but there's also a lot of important activity in the Northeast. And as Walt said, the prospect of passage of a bill in 2017 or 2018 is probably greater in these states. So if you live in one of those states, let us know. We're happy to plug you into our advocacy work in those places. Ryan, other questions?
Next up, we have Richard Lawton. Richard, you're on.
Yes, hi. Actually, it's the same question. I was also interested in the implications of state-level carbon price legislation, so you've already addressed it. So thank you.
Yeah, well, Bob, let me just ask, Bob, do you want to say anything about that? Because I know you've been traveling around the country quite a bit and probably hearing from folks about, the merit of a carbon tax in their own state. Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I think it bless those who go first, but they are on the bleeding edge is the challenge because of the inability to do a border adjustment at the state level. That Walt was just mentioning, it's such an important thing. If you act as
and Bob, I just wanted to ask, could you explain what that means? Everyone might not know, if you pass a tax on one state, how it impacts another. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so let's say right now that Governor Rauner in Illinois decided that the way to fix the deficit in Illinois was to put on a carbon tax. The problem for him would be that Indiana would put up more of those billboards that say Illinois yet ? And encourage industry to move from Illinois over to Indiana. Because if you increase the energy cost in Illinois, those billboards become really salient to business people driving into Indiana. So that's the challenge of state action. But nevertheless, it does help. I agree with what Walt just said, that it increases the conversation, it amplifies the conversation, brings it up, makes it topical. This is all very helpful to spurring federal action, because the better play is clearly at the federal level, where you can do, as Walt was just saying, a WTO compliant border adjustment. If you do that, then you get the whole world in on this. Not just Illinois, let's say, not just Indiana, not just the United States, not just Canada, but the entire world. And then we have a shot at free enterprise delivering the kind of innovation as rapidly as we need in order to solve this problem. But one thing I would ask is, let's learn something from the Washington State initiative, where some folks on what we call the environmental left, we are the eco-right at republicen.org, some folks on the environmental left thank the Washington State initiative because they insisted on addressing some legacy cost and environmental justice kind of causes, and they would not accept revenue neutrality. Well, this is really a shoot yourself in the foot moment. I mean, it was really just take good aim and fire away, because the result is that we got nothing in Washington State. But we could have had a real teachable moment, that conservatives joining with progressives to say, listen, we're not going to get everything we want in this. We're not going to, we on the left, let's say, or the people on the left aren't going to address every environmental justice claim that's ever been made. We're not going to address those right now. What we're going to do is just going forward, we're going to say there's a price on carbon dioxide, and it's paired with a dollar for dollar return of those revenues to the people, so that it's acceptable to our friends on the right. Then those progressives would have been participating in something that was really ground shaking. But as it was a fail. So hopefully we're going to learn from the fail.
Next up we have John McGarry. John, you're on.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, good. My question is one of sort of peripheral nature, about the measure of carbon dioxide. It is alarming, but what is not stated and what we are not considering, it seems to me, is the amount of CO2 equivalents in addition to carbon dioxide. I heard a podcast with former Secretary Shultz, where he said we are already at 500 parts per million CO2 and CO2 equivalents, including methane and other greenhouse gases. Is there anything? I mean, if the problem exists, we're already past 450 parts per million of carbon dioxide. So we're trying. We seems to be what we're doing. We're looking at this 450 ppm and trying to stay below it. But it seems to me that the issue is far more critical now to get moving, because we're already past that threshold.
So the question, yeah. What is the question there?
Well, the question is, does that issue, if we look at it as 500 parts per million, does that give? Is there any momentum behind that to give Congress some more urgent incentive to do?
Yeah, good.
Well,
Josh, if you're still, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I'm here, and I can start, addressing the issue of the CO2 equivalents. We address that issue in two ways in our bill. One, CO2 equivalent gases would be taxed at their carbon equivalency. So we do cover all greenhouse gases as defined by the EPA. And secondly, we have a section in our bill to deal with the issue of escaped methane, which is really a problem and something that we don't fully understand at this point. So our bill would have the government study the issue of escaped methane, and then several years out apply a surtax on top of the regular carbon fee to account for methane that escapes in the three different main fossil fuel categories: coal, natural gas, and oil. So in other words, if Treasury had estimated that escaped methane in the coal industry equaled 25% of the amount of emissions the coal industry was putting out in that year, there would be a 25% surtax on top of the carbon fee.
There's one other thing that can do, and that provision is excellent because methane, while is a much shorter-lived greenhouse gas, is much more virulent. Depending on the time frame, 25 to 50% time is more virulent as carbon dioxide, and our grandkids are going to be living in that time frame. So what you're doing and senators doing is extremely important. But there's something you can do more immediate. There is currently pending before Congress under the Congressional Review Act a bill that will repeal the ongoing federal regulations affecting and the regulatory process affecting methane emissions. And those methane regulations are extremely important for reasons that have just been stated. And they're also one of these regulatory regimes where industry has participated enthusiastically, because if you can control methane leakage, you can avoid the loss of a valuable commodity. And that effort is currently ongoing, and it is about to be stalled by a Trump administration rollback. All regulations are bad, and it's the one on the chopping block right now. So in addition to calling your congressman, particularly if he or she is or your senator, if they're Republican, and asking them to vote for Senator Whitehouse's long-term solution, demand that they not take action by approving this provision that would repeal the methane regulations in process, that if they do is going to complicate the matter and the problem very, very significantly. So that's the immediate ask.
Great. Thank you, Walt, for bringing that front and center. Ryan, I think we have time for one more question. It's about 5 to the hour, so is there... Yep.
We have Chris Berger on the line. All right. We'll go ahead and move on. Chris must be having audio issues to John Porterfield. John, you're on.
Hi, I'm unmuted now.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I know that. Is that Chris or John?
Yeah, I forwarded several questions. One that concerns me is it's probably not directly related to this conference, but I've looked at a number of documents explaining how planners would do resilience work. None of these documents deal realistically with a situation where resilience work would be futile. The climate change impact would simply overwhelm any attempt to plan resilience. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a realistic, and I'm talking about FEMA, the GAO, National Research Council. I wonder if there's going to be a realistic document that admits to the fact that resilience work that we're funding, some of it should not be funded because it's simply going to be a waste of money.
Yeah. Would someone like to address that question?
I guess just Bob Inglis, just with the generality, that is a very interesting, specific question that I don't know a great deal about. But I would say it is a helpful messaging point that, you know, if you if you want a much bigger government, just don't act on climate change. That's what we go around explaining to conservatives, fellow conservatives, is that one surefire way to get a great big federal government is to fail to address climate change. Because if we do that, we're going to have the National Guard rescuing us from all kinds of natural disasters. And so it really is, but I think where the question, where I gather the question is coming from, is a very specific question about, is some of the resilience work going to be overrun anyway? So, they basically back up and make sure that where you're planning the resilience is the place that isn't going to be overrun, which surely is a valid point. I don't know how to answer that with much more specificity than the messaging point, which is what a great opportunity to, as a conservative, as we are at republican.org, to keep the government footprint smaller by addressing climate change so we don't have all these disasters that are phenomenally expensive.
Bob, that is a really important point. These unintended consequences of not taking action will only get more expensive in the future, as you're pointing out. So thank you. So folks, we're at the top of the hour, and we had reserved an hour for our presentation, and I want to thank our speakers very much. Walt Minnick with Partnership for Responsible Growth, Bob Inglis with the Energy and Environment and Enterprise Institute at George Mason University, and Josh Karetny with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. We encourage you to stay involved, and again, if you're interested in taking some immediate action, we do have these in-district congressional meetings from April 11th to the 21st, and then we're doing a national business climate lobby fly-in on May 2nd. Happy to tell you more about that. So again, thanks to our speakers, and we hope you all have a very productive day here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll send out a recording of this presentation in a little bit. Thanks.